You ever hear that expression, so-and-so was born to do this or that thing? Well, Violet Jessop was pretty much the opposite of that. And after surviving an incredible 3 separate ship accidents, with 2 sinking in just 5 years, one could say that she probably shouldn't have ever set foot on a boat in her life. Depending on the way you look at it, Violet either had the best or worst luck in life. Born in Argentina to Irish immigrants, Violet contracted tuberculosis as a child. This was sometime in the late 1800s when medical technology's best solution to tuberculosis was getting massaged with vinegar or huffing down a can of turpentine. Of course, this was a rather bold scientific leap forward from the Middle Ages tuberculosis treatment known as the royal touch, where sufferers would line up and wait to be touched by an English or French king or queen. Exactly how a sufferer would be touched is unknown. Was it a quick attaboy pat on the head or a sportsmanlike good game slap on the rump? Sadly, the knowledge is lost to history. Despite being given only months to live, little Violet knew deep down in her heart that she had a higher calling in life, namely to go 3 rounds with Poseidon himself, the angry lord of the sea, and beat him in each matchup. She managed to survive her tuberculosis, though sadly her father would die and the family was forced to move back to England. Violet's mother soon found work as a stewardess on Royal Mail Line ships, at a time when the British and the French were engaged in fierce competition to see who could build the fastest, most luxurious passenger liner to cross the Atlantic. Violet's original plans for her life was to attend a convent and give her life to religious service. But when her mother's health deteriorated, Violet became a stewardess to help support her ailing mother. Soon she was working for the legendary White Star Line, putting in a 17-hour day and being paid the equivalent of about 230 British pounds per month. Violet was assigned to the Olympic, which at the time was the largest passenger liner in the world. On September 20th, 1911, the Olympic was cruising near the British battlecruiser the HMS Hawke. As the Olympic made a wide turn to starboard, the width of the turn took the captain of the Hawke by surprise, and he was unable to maneuver the Hawke out of the way fast enough before the 2 ships collided. A sturdy cruiser, the Hawke's bow had been designed to smash into other ships and sink them by ramming into them, which resulted in large tears on the Olympic's hull and the flooding of 2 of her watertight compartments. Despite this, she managed to steam back to harbor for repairs under her own power. The Hawke, meanwhile, suffered so much damage that she nearly capsized on the spot and had to be towed back to a shipyard for repairs. Clearly, the Hawke, designed to sink ships by ramming them, was not particularly good at its job, which is probably why it was sunk by a German U-boat 2 years into World War I. The Germans, unlike the British, apparently preferred to sink ships by exploding them rather than trying to ram them and failing miserably. Violet likely suffered great trauma from the collision, and after seeing how horrible the Hawke had been at its job of sinking ships by ramming them, she probably had serious doubts about British ship engineering. That's likely why when the legendary Titanic, billed by the British as unsinkable, came looking for a crew, she was likely extremely skeptical of that claim and reluctant to join the crew. Nonetheless, her friends persuaded her to take the job on the Titanic, officially going down in history as the worst friends in the world. On the 4th day out, early in the morning, Violet was awakened in her bunk by the terrible sound of metal screaming and buckling under great pressure. The Titanic had encountered the fatal iceberg that would be its doom. Violet was immediately ordered up onto the deck and would later tell that the passengers were strangely calm, with the ship's officers enforcing a strict women and children first policy at gunpoint sometimes. Violet boarded a boat full of women and had a child thrust into her arms. Incredibly, the distraught mother of the child, lost in the chaos, would be reunited 8 hours later aboard the Carpathia as it took the survivors. What might be the strangest of all, though, is the fact that on the night of the sinking, just hours before, as Violet was getting ready for bed, she'd been reading from a book containing a translated Hebrew prayer. The prayer had been given to her by an old Irish woman and was rather peculiar, as it was meant to help protect the reader from fire and water. Violet read the prayer herself and then made her roommate read it as well. Whether the prayer worked or not, Poseidon's second attempt at murdering Violet Jessop had failed, but he was not done trying. 2 years later, Germany decided it was time to kick off its favorite 20th century hobby of starting and losing terribly world wars. Violet volunteered to serve aboard the HMHS Britannic, a sister ship to the Titanic, albeit with serious design changes after the latter's sinking. The Britannic had been an ocean liner like the Titanic, but at the start of the war had been pressed into British service and converted into a hospital ship. On her 6th voyage to the Middle Eastern theater in order to pick up wounded and bring them back to England, the Britannic found itself crossing the Mediterranean Sea once more. As she passed by the Greek Isle of Kea, an explosion shook the ship. Probably having an extreme case of deja vu, Violet immediately heeded the ship captain's call to prepare to abandon ship. The Britannic had accidentally wandered into a minefield laid down by German U-boats. While hospital ships were not legal wartime targets, mines sadly don't discriminate, and the Britannic had the bad luck of running straight into one. The explosion was small enough that those on the opposite end of the boat simply assumed the ship had run over a smaller ship and was not in any serious danger. The reality was that the explosion had ruptured watertight bulkheads and flooded one of the boiler rooms. Luckily for the Britannic, the sinking of the Titanic had led to the ship going back to the dry dock to have her watertight bulkheads elevated to rise all the way up to B deck. This helped keep the ship afloat for a while, but unfortunately nurses had opened up the portholes on the lower decks in order to ventilate the wards, which was against standing orders. As the ship listed to her side, the open portholes allowed the seawater to rush in, adding to the flooding all across the ship. The coast of the Greek island of Kea was close, and thus, despite an increasing starboard list, the captain of the ship turned her toward the faraway beach. His hope was to beach the massive ship, but the explosion had destroyed the steering gear, which made steering by rudder impossible. Instead, the captain ordered the port shaft be cranked up to a higher speed than the starboard shaft, helping steer the ship via variable power to the propellers. Slowly, the ship turned toward the island and even made headway to the distant beach. While it had taken over an hour for the Titanic to sink, though, the Britannic was in serious trouble just 15 minutes into her encounter with the sea mine. In a state of panic, a few crew members lowered 2 lifeboats into the water, despite not having been told to do so. The captain realized what was going on and immediately ordered the ship's engine to be stopped. Sadly, the order was given too late. The 2 lifeboats that had been lowered were sucked into the still-turning propeller and along with the passengers chopped to pieces. The captain ordered no more lifeboats be launched and restarted the ship's engine, hoping that it would be able to beach the massive ship. As the sinking increased, however, it became apparent that it would be impossible to reach the shore in time, and thus the captain ordered the engines cut for good and gave 2 long blasts on the ship's steam whistle, the official order to abandon ship. By then, the water had already reached the bridge, and the captain was able to simply walk off the deck and into the water, swimming to a nearby boat and coordinating the rescue from there. Of 1,065 people on board, only 30 would be lost in the accident. Sadly, most of these were from the lifeboats that were launched without permission, their passengers sucked into the massive propeller and sliced into mincemeat. Despite surviving 3 disasters at sea, Violet incredibly decided that she would continue her career on the ocean. Or perhaps by this time she was pretty convinced that there was really nothing left Poseidon could throw at her to kill her once and for all. Violet would go on to spend 42 years at sea before retiring and passing away in May 1971 at the ripe old age of 83. We know you probably have a sinking feeling that this video is over, but hey, cheer up, because you can keep the watch party going by clicking this video over here. Or perhaps you prefer this other one over here instead. Either way, you can't lose, so click now.